Hello everyone, my name is Hylan Arclight, and in this video I'll be discussing the future of playable characters in Genshin Impact and their vulnerability to power creep. I will start by providing a general description of power creep as it relates to Genshin Impact, then a list of guidelines that I use to judge each character, and finally a tier list of sorts where I place each currently released character into categories based on their susceptibility to power creep. Before I explain power creep, here are a few disclaimers. Number 1. Remember that the conclusions I reach are just based on patterns I notice in other games and personal speculation, and thus are ultimately my opinion. Number 2. If I say that a character is prone to falling victim to power creep, it does not mean that I think that the character is bad or not worth building. This video is targeted towards players that aren't sure which character to build or are just curious. With that being said, if you really like a character, please feel free to invest as much resources as you want. After all, Genshin is more enjoyable if you enjoy the characters you build. Number 3. As someone who tends to actively avoid leaks, I know nothing about any of the characters that will be released on the future. As such, I'm only making assumptions based on information in characters that are already released. As of recording this video, Kamisato Ayaka's banner is live. Therefore, this video will be discussing characters released before Kamisato Ayaka and Ayaka herself. This video will not be discussing future playable characters such as Yoimiya, Ball, or Kokomi. And number 4. I know you hear it every video, but I have to say it here. If you like the video, please consider liking the video, commenting, and subscribing to my channel. It's free and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this topic. Additionally, in the description box below should be links to my Twitch channel where I go live every day between 5 to 7 PM PST, as well as links to my Twitter and Instagram where I let you guys know when I go live. So please feel free to follow me on those platforms. With that being said, let's move on to the video. First and foremost, I will define power creep so that everyone watching understands the concept of power creep. In general, power creep refers to a character, weapon, or other resource that perform the same role as an already released and similar character, weapon, or other resource but better. In terms of Genshin Impact specifically, power creep can refer to a future character, weapon, or artifact set that have better skills, passives, talents, numbers, or effects than a previously released character, weapon, or artifact set. As a quick side note, power creep exists so that players are more incentivized to spend their money buying resources such as summoning currency or other benefits that will provide players more chances at summoning currency such as the Welkin Moon or Battle Pass. As such, it's very likely that Mihoyo will release characters that are better than previously released characters so that players are more incentivized to spend money. Now that I've defined power creep as clearly as I can, I would like to set some ground rules before theorizing which characters are more prone to power creep. First, let's discuss what I have and have not considered. The first thing that I considered are characters that share a weapon type and element. Though Genshin Impact prefers to release characters with different combinations of weapon type and element, there are only 7 types of visions and 5 types of weapons, and eventually characters will have to share one or both. However, 2 characters that share both a weapon type and vision element can fulfill different roles and have different playstyles. Consider cases such as Razor and Beidou, Zhongling and Hu Tao, and finally Barbara and Mona. The second thing that I considered was the ease of obtaining a weapon, artifact, or character. For this video, heavy emphasis will be put on the availability and ease of attaining a weapon or artifact. Resin and or primogem cost, ease of domain, as well as frequency of drops will be taken into consideration. For characters, 5-star limited characters will be at a higher risk of being replaced if a future character is more available, such as being a permanent 5-star character or a 4-star character. However, the status of being a 5-star limited character did not have a major impact on where they place on the tier list. Number 3. The third thing that I considered was a character's max potential, including constellations. To be as general as possible and to make this process much simpler, I have assumed that a character's max potential is their stats at level 90 with max constellations, regardless of the character's rarity. For 5-star characters, I will mention what number constellation each effect is, if relevant, but that will have no overall impact on the character and their placement on the tier list. And finally, the last thing I considered was a character's current niche. For this tier list, I also considered what niches a particular character has currently and how they compare to other characters already released. For some characters, their niche isn't very useful now, but it can be very useful later on in this game's lifespan, and the reverse can also happen. What I did not consider for this tier list were characters that are similar in playstyle to do the same exact skills, weapon type, constellations, and better scaling. In these scenarios, the older character will always be worse than the newly released character. For example, let's say that Mihoyo releases a character that has the same exact element, weapon type, and stats, as well as an elemental skill and burst that are functionally the same as Fischl. Fischl's elemental skill does 219% of her attack stat upon summoning Oz, and Oz intermittently does damage equal to 169% of her attack stat. Let's say that the new character's elemental skill does the same exact thing, but does 239% of their attack upon summoning their pet, and intermittently does damage equal to 180% of their attack stat. In this scenario, the newly released character is clearly better than Fischl. If I were to take these scenarios into account, then every character will be prone to power creep equally, and this video wouldn't be helpful. As a side note, the described scenario is realistically unlikely to happen. Mihoyo has already released characters with the same weapon type and element, but gave them different skills so that they have different roles in a team and different playstyles. Consider Barbara and Mona. The second thing that I did not consider was the rarity of main stats and substats on artifacts. This video will not consider how rare certain main stats and substats are on artifact pieces. Each character will be assumed to have nearly ideal artifacts. The last thing that I did not consider were non-combat related abilities. Abilities that do not directly impact battles in any way, such as Ningguang's ore hunting passive, Ganyu and Zhongli's weapon crafting passives, etc., were not considered for this video. However, non-combat abilities such as Ayaka and Mona's dash will be considered lightly because they have an impact on the character's playstyle during fights. Now that I've established the guidelines I use to judge each character, I will now share the tier list of which characters I think will age the best and which characters won't. Up on the screen should be a tier list that places every single character based on how I think they will age. Within each tier, I ranked each character compared to other characters in the same tier. Generally speaking, I predict that characters that appear on the left of the tier list will age better than characters that appear at the right end of the tier list. Here's a reminder that I took into consideration their current niches in version 2.0 of Genshin Impact, how unique their niches are, and which roles they could play on this team. For this tier list, I placed Traveler in the unreleased characters or characters with more potential tier because Traveler currently has the most potential out of any other character. There are 4 other regions in the game and 4 different elements, and therefore 4 different skill sets that he or she can use or obtain. As such, I felt wrong placing Traveler in any other tier. As I said earlier, I will not be discussing characters that are not released currently. As such, characters like Sayu, Yoimiya, Kokumi, and Ball will not be discussed in this video. Remember that this tier list is neither a ranking of the best characters in the game currently, nor is it a guide on how to build characters and what roles they play. This is more of a prediction whether the characters will age well or not. The guidelines I mentioned earlier, these are the conclusions I made of the future characters. The first conclusion that I reached was that characters whose main goal is to output as much damage as possible with kits that force them to stay on the field for long periods of time are the characters most prone to power creep. This means that out of all the playable characters currently released in Genshin Impact, Xiao and Razor are most susceptible to power creep. Though Razor's and Xiao's elemental burst increases their damage output greatly, their elemental bursts lose effect upon switch out, and thus both characters have little support capabilities. Additionally, damage numbers are usually the first things to be power crept in the game, such as Genshin Impact. You can already see this in game as characters such as Eula have greatly surpassed Razor's damage output, and many people choose other characters such as Hu Tao and Ganyu over Xiao to be a main damage dealer due to access to better offensive artifact sets. With little support capabilities and lack of strong artifacts to maintain comparable numbers to newer units, Razor and Xiao currently are the most vulnerable to power creep. Other characters with an emphasis on damage output such as Diluc and Eula will age slightly better due to the intricacies in their kits. Diluc can provide multiple instances of pyro damage due to his elemental skill and thus age far better despite the fact elemental burst also requires him to stay on the field to be effective. Eula is also in the same boat because her elemental burst only stays while she's on the field, but her elemental skill provides resistance to interruption and defense, periodic cryo application through her elemental skill, and sustained physical damage. Though their kits are geared towards being a main damage dealer, they can be somewhat flexed in other support damage dealer roles to varying degrees of success. The second conclusion that I reached was that characters whose kits are flexible and can be built differently to play multiple roles will age far better than characters that can play only one role. For this conclusion, let's consider Ganyu, a character built for being a main damage dealer with her Frostflake arrow charge attacks. The rest of her kit is great for dealing damage off-field as well. Her elemental skill can have 2 charges with Constellation and deals 2 instances of cryo damage each, and her elemental burst periodically deals cryo damage while also boosting the cryo damage of your party by 20%. Because she can consistently apply cryo damage while she's on and off the field, she'll age better than other characters such as Hu Tao, who provide great pyro damage as a DPS while she's the active party member, but can consistently apply multiple instances of pyro damage while off-field and thus making reactions more difficult. The third conclusion that I reached was that characters whose primary focus in supporting the team through healing, shielding, or skills that increase other characters' stats will age the best. Most characters that heal either through their elemental skill, elemental burst, or both, such as Barbara, Jean, and Bennett, provide sufficient healing to increase the survivability of your entire team, even in the hardest content Genshin Impact has to offer. Characters with strong shields such as Zhongli, Diona, and to a lesser extent Noelle can be built with already available artifact sets and equipped with weapons so that their shields absorb large amounts of damage and have a good uptime. Until enemies in future updates do enough damage to outpace the rate of healing and break shields fast, the supports that improve survivability will age well. Of course, healers that provide bonuses other than healing will age better than healers who just heal. Characters such as C6 Chi-Chi and C6 Barbara can revive team members if the requirements of their Constellation's effects are fulfilled. Noelle and Diona's Diona's both provide shields and healing. Jean provides viridescent veneratory buffs, enemy knockback with her elemental skill, and a debuff cleanse in her elemental burst. Finally, Bennett provides a strong attack buff to his elemental burst and provides energy to his entire team with his elemental skill. In addition, characters with skills and passives that boost the damage of other characters, such as Bennett's aforementioned attack increasing effect and his elemental burst, Sucrose's EM passive, which boosts the EM of the other characters in her party, and Zhongli's elemental and physical resistance shred and his shield will always be useful. All DPS characters, from currently playable ones to future release DPS characters, will benefit the same from these damage boosting effects. The fourth conclusion that I reached is that characters with elemental skills or elemental bursts that remain on the field, even when said character leaves the field, will age better than characters whose elemental skills or elemental bursts have a duration but lose effectiveness when the character who activated the skill left the field. Jingxiu, Fischl, Zhongling, Beidou, and Ganyu are some of the characters who either have an elemental burst and or an elemental skill that lingers on the field and provide an instance of elemental damage and thus make it easier to trigger specific elemental reactions. Jingxiu and Beidou have elemental bursts that trigger when any of the party members initiates a normal effect and apply the Hydro and Electro status to enemies easily. Fischl, Zhongling, Mona, and Ganyu are some of the characters that have elemental skills and elemental bursts that periodically deal elemental damage and inflict enemies with their corresponding element, again making it easier to trigger elemental reactions, thus boosting the overall damage of your team. The fifth conclusion that I reached is that older sub-DPS characters will age depending on how easy it is to cause elemental reactions with their skills and the types of elemental reactions they can cause. This is an offshoot of the previous conclusion that I made. While the damage that support damage characters such as Jingxiu, Fischl, and Zhongling still matter to be effective, ultimately their main advantage is that they provide damage of a specific element and make triggering reactions much easier. As such, these characters will age well because their damage numbers don't matter as much compared to a DPS character, but their element they're inflicting into enemies does matter. And finally, the last conclusion that I reached are characters with unique non-combat skills or passives that assist in exploration will remain useful until their non-combat skill is present on a widely available unit. While I did not consider this for my rankings, technically characters such as Ayaka, Mona, and Kaya have unique applications outside of combat. Kaya can make crossing large bodies of waters easier because of his short elemental skill cooldown, whereas Ayaka, Mona, Keqing, and Venti have skills that make traveling from one location to another easier. Before I end off the video, the last thing I want to talk about is why I placed each character into this tier. This part of the video will be just like a short list of bullet points for each character and explaining why I put this character in each tier and why they are going to age well or not. For Venti, he provides viridescent vener debuffs, he can group enemies with his elemental burst, he can stop enemy charges with elemental skill, and then his elemental skill makes traveling vertically easier. Bennett has a fast healing speed and an elemental burst that has an attack boosting effect that can stack with the 4-piece effect of Noblesse Oblige, and his elemental skill provides a good amount of energy. I placed Zhongli third because his strong hold cooldown and his strong shield means that his shield will have a constant uptime as long as it doesn't break, and it makes a healer unnecessary with teams that have Zhongli. His shield also reduces the elemental and physical resistance of all enemies in a small radius, boosts geo damage by augmenting other geo constructs, and 4-piece tenacity of the Millilith is amazing on Zhongli and can boost your attack. Sucrose can provide an EM buff under easy conditions, as well as Viridis and Vener debuffs. She provides energy through 2 charges of her elemental skill, 3 charges if you manage to proc sacrificial fragments, and has an elemental burst that can group enemies in a smaller area than Venti. Diona has a short elemental skill cooldown when held that can provide a weaker shield than Zhongli, but overall still effective. At C6, she can heal and boost the elemental mastery of the active character by 200 while above 50% HP, and she benefits greatly from the passes of Sacrificial Bow and Favonius Bow. For the second tier, Jingxiu's elemental skill is great at producing energy, provides additional hydro damage to active characters' normal attacks with his elemental burst. However, he is dependent on Sacrificial Sword for passive and consistency and energy recharge. Fischl, elemental skill and elemental burst can provide a source of electro damage. C6 allows Oz to attack with the active character and applies the electro element. She's flexible as both a sub DPS and a main DPS, but her elemental burst is not as impactful as others, and her electro element isn't very good. Kaidehara Kazuha, his elemental skill makes traveling vertical distances easier. His elemental burst can be infused with an element to increase damage dealt by that element. He provides viridescent vener debuffs. C6 Kazuha can be focused into a main DPS, and his craftable 4-star Iron Sword is very effective. Albedo is a character that can provide a character for Geo Resonance. His elemental skill provides geo damage off the field, and elemental bursts huge amounts of geo damage. However, lack of a strong, easily obtainable sword means that he's very hard to build, and his elemental skill makes traveling vertical distances a little easier. Ganyu is currently considered one of the best characters because she does great damage as a main DPS. However, she can also be flexed as a damage support. Her elemental skill and elemental burst can provide multiple instances of reliable cryo damage and access to great weapons for both roles. You can give her the Crescent Bow for a main damage dealer and Stringless for support damage dealer. Zhongling is placed in this tier tier because her elemental skill and her elemental burst provide instances of pyro damage and make triggering reactions easier. She can deflex as a physical main damage dealer if needed, and her pyro element means Zhang can fulfill pyro resonance with one other character and can trigger either melt or vaporize, which are the two strongest reactions in the game. For Mona, her sprint makes traveling open world easier. Her elemental skill can taunt enemies and provide instances of hydro damage, making freeze and vaporize reactions much easier to activate. Her elemental burst can increase the damage of the next attack a lot. However, her sprint can be awkward times to fight with. Beidou can provide a shield to allies upon completion of her elemental skill, which is the effect of her Constellation 2. Her elemental burst triggers with any active member's normal attacks and provides a source of electro element and damage. However, elemental burst is only effective with multiple enemies. Jean is placed in this tier because she provides Viridescent Venerer debuffs and a Nemo resistance shred with Constellations. Her elemental skill has a short cooldown and can throw enemies in the air for huge fall damage, and her elemental burst can heal and cleanse. However, having an 80 cost elemental burst, which is the highest cost for an elemental burst, means that she faces competition from other healers. However, it is important to note that Jean's passive refunds some of that energy, so you don't have to worry too much about her energy cost. Kaya's in this tier, probably the most surprising out of anyone. He can make crossing bodies of waters easy due to his short elemental skill cooldown. He has a lingering ult that deals constant cryo damage in a small radius around an active character, and his elemental skill provides a lot of energy. It's just that his damage output is not as high as say Ganyu. In Yanfei, finally, I placed in this tier. Yanfei was a bit of an awkward place for me, but I placed her in basically between the tier 2 and tier 3. Yanfei can be built either for a quick swap team as a main damage dealer. Elemental skill, elemental burst provide maximum seals for big charge attacks. She can deal pyro damage consistently and fulfills half of a requirement for pyro resonance. However, her elemental burst and skill are not oriented towards support, and Scarlet seals disappear upon switch out, meaning she's less flexible than some of these other characters in terms of playstyle. For the third tier, this is the tier with characters that have unique niches, but they may or may not be useful, and they depend on future character releases. The first one in this tier is Xiangyun, who has a reputation for ruining damage of other characters. However, this is because we don't have a character that can fully take advantage of it yet. His elemental skill can be awkward and interfere with certain characters' damage output, but is still strong with cryo damage dealers with the Claymore, Sword, or Polearm. Like, for example, Ayaka can greatly use the elemental skill effect. Xiangyun was placed in this tier because his elemental skill can be awkward and interfere with certain characters' damage output, but is still strong with cryo damage dealers with the Claymore, Sword, or Polearm. He gives a slight increase to attack speed and elemental skill cooldown reduction to characters who use a skill within a radius of the elemental skill. And a strong elemental burst and access to both Blizzard and Noblesse means that he can deal a lot of damage with his skills. However, he is somewhat hard to fit onto teams because he interferes with a lot of characters' damage output in playstyle. Rosaria is placed here because her elemental skill has a short cooldown and produces energy. Her elemental burst provides constant cryo damage and can increase the crit rate of all of their team members. However, she lacks a support, she lacks a shield and other support capabilities and is thus hard to fit on teams. Child does a large amount of damage with thrust and Heart of Death with the 4-piece effect, enables many Hydro-related reactions, and works well with a variety of characters such as Zhongling or Fischl. However, his long elemental skill cooldown and is mediocre without his elemental skill active means that he will probably be dead weight for some period of fights. Hu Tao has a strong damage in the main DPS and can apply constant pyro damage while on field with her elemental skill active. She fulfills 1/2 requirement for the pyro resonance. However, lack of a support-oriented kit, meaning she can be somewhat inflexible. She has the lowest base attack in the entire game, meaning that when her elemental skill is on cooldown, means that she's very ineffective. Barbara was placed in this tier because she provides consistent healing through elemental skill and elemental burst and can fully revive a heal a fallen team member every 15 minutes. This is useful for saving a run in Abyss. She generates a bit of energy for herself, but grants an attack buff upon switching out due to access to Thrilling Tales of Dragon Slayers, which is probably the best support weapon for Catalyst that we have. However, the main drawbacks for using Barbara is that she cannot generate as much energy as say Jean, Diona, or Bennett, and she can accidentally cause your character to be frozen or electrocharged if elemental skill is active, and she only heals and provides no other support capabilities. Lisa can be flexed as both the main and support damage dealer, depending on how many constellations you have of her. Her elemental burst can reduce defensive enemies within its radius, which is why I placed her in her tier. She has access to a lot of strong books that work well with her. You can put her with Widsith or Dodoko for offensive, or even Thrilling Tales for quick swap teams. However, electro reactions are really weak. They're probably the weakest reaction in the game currently. Her elemental burst can knock smaller enemies out of her elemental burst. Noelle is on this tier because she provides both strong healing and shields. More reliable if Noelle is in C1, and she can deal a lot of damage because of her elemental burst converts the defense into attack. However, she has the weakest and unreliable heals out of any healer, as her healing is mostly chance-based without C1, and she generates no energy, which means it's very hard to fit her into teams. And finally, Chi-Chi can revive all fall members in 40 to 50% health when she uses her elemental burst, and she provides the strongest heals out of any healer. However, she has lack of access to strong support source, and she doesn't generate energy at all. However, she does provide one requirement for choir resonance, which is nice. Now, the next two, which is 50-50 whether they age well. These characters may or may not age well. It just depends on future character releases and how fast their numbers get power crept. For Ningguang, she's a strong DPS and can be built as a main damage dealer or support damage dealer based around her burst. Her Jade Screen can actually block projectiles, though hard to aim for that purpose. She's semi-reliant on Geo Resonance for being a main damage dealer. However, she has great access to books such as Witsith, though Elemental Mastery is useless on Ningguang. And Dodo Cow. Eula provides a lot of physical damage through elemental burst. Her elemental skills can stack defense and resistance to interruption. She's a safe DPS as a result. I don't have her, so I don't know how to play her. However, um, her kit is mostly focused on being a main damage dealer, and damage numbers can be higher for other characters. Many enemies also have physical resistance, but Super Conduct can help alleviate this problem. However, you would still notice the physical resistance. Ayaka, her sprint makes traveling easier and fuse weapon with cryo skills are great at dealing damage. She is a relatively new character as of writing the script, so I just placed her here just to be safe. Klee can be flexed as either a main DPS or support DPS, does a lot of pyro damage to a small area. She's very fragile and relies on shields for protection, and I hear she's difficult to play, I'm not too sure. Xingyan, she provides a shield, although she probably provides the weakest shield. She's more of a physical damage dealer, and again, she suffers from the same issues as Eula, as a lot of characters have. A lot of enemies have physical resistance. She fulfills pyro resonance, and that's why I placed her here. Diluc can provide multiple instances of pyro damage with his elemental skill. He provides pyro resonance as well. He has decent access to offensive weapons, such as Wolf's Gravestone, even though that's a 5-star weapon. You also have Prototype Animus. However, he requires to be on the field for his elemental burst to be effective and is somewhat reliant on lingering effects from other characters to proc reactions. Keqing, her elemental skill makes traveling over obstacles easier. Her teleport makes it a lot easier to travel open world. She can self-infuse her weapon with her elemental burst with Electro. And she's a DPS with decent sword options, but she has a relatively weak vision element in Constellation. And her kit is geared towards being a main DPS role because so that means her kit is in place odds generally inflexible. And finally we have Amber. Amber's in this tier because she technically doesn't have a kit that requires her to be on the field. She provides a taunt that deals pyro damage as well as a short-lasting elemental burst that can provide minor buffs at C6. She's a relatively weak kit in her elemental burst, and her elemental skill is not effective in practice, so it's not required for her to be on the field to deal damage. This is why she's on this tier. As for Razor and Zhao, Zhao ages better just because he is just a better character. His elemental skill provides damage and energy to himself, and his elemental burst provides big damage but forces Zhao to be on the field. He requires support to be effective, and he has a lack of a strong artifact set. And finally, Razor is the character that is most likely to age the worst. His elemental skill gains stacks, which is appear upon switch out. His elemental burst also requires her to stay on the field as an active member. Damage already surpassed by later characters that were already released, and he's super dependent on super conduct to be effective and reach high damage numbers. And with that, that reaches the end of this video. Please feel free to like the video, comment, and subscribe. Thank you guys for listening to the end of this video, and have a nice day, everyone. Peace.